The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation filled the small-town diner as Sarah wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Her feet ached, her lower back throbbed, and the fake smile she'd worn all day was beginning to crack at the edges. But she kept going, just like she always did. Single mothers didn't have the luxury of bad days. Not when there were bills to pay and a 6-year-old daughter waiting at home who still believed her mama could fix anything. Sarah had learned long ago that survival meant swallowing your pride, ignoring your pain, and showing up even when the world seemed determined to knock you down. Tonight, though, the world had something different in store for her. Something that would remind her that even in the darkest moments, humanity still had the power to shine through. It started when 3 men walked through the door just before closing time. Sarah's heart sank the moment she saw them. Their swagger, their loud voices, the way they looked around the diner like they owned the place. She'd waitressed long enough to recognize trouble when it walked through the door. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, mustering her most professional tone. "Take any seat you'd like." The largest of the 3, a man with a shaved head and arms covered in faded tattoos, smirked as he slid into a booth. His companions, one wiry and restless, the other thick-necked and mean-eyed, flanked him like guard dogs. "Gentlemen," the bald one mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You hear that, boys? Lady thinks we're gentlemen." His friends laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the quiet diner. The only other customers, an elderly couple in the corner, glanced up nervously before quickly returning to their coffee. Sarah approached their table with menus, her hands steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Yeah, how about you start by smiling a little more," the wiry one said, leaning back in his seat. "You look like someone died." "Just tired," Sarah replied evenly. "Long shift. Now what can I get you?" They ordered burgers, fries, coffee, but made the process as difficult as possible, changing their minds, making crude jokes, watching her with eyes that made her skin crawl. She took their order and retreated to the kitchen, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You okay?" asked Tommy, the cook, a Vietnam veteran in his 60s who'd worked at the diner longer than Sarah had been alive. "Fine," she lied. "Just some jerks being jerks." When she brought out their food, things escalated. The bald man grabbed her wrist as she set down his plate. "You married?" he asked, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Let go of me," Sarah said firmly, trying to pull away. "I asked you a question, sweetheart. That's none of your business." "Let go." He released her, but only after holding on long enough to make his point. His friends laughed again, and Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger and helplessness. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to make a scene, couldn't risk getting fired because some customer complained she was rude. "Anything else?" she asked through gritted teeth. "Yeah," the thick-necked one said. "How about your phone number?" "Not happening." "Come on, baby." "Don't be like that." Sarah walked away without responding, but she could feel their eyes on her back, could hear their laughter following her. The elderly couple in the corner looked sympathetic but said nothing. Tommy peered through the kitchen window, his jaw tight, but he was an old man with a bad back. What could he do? She was refilling the couple's coffee when the bald man called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey! Service here is terrible." "You deaf or something?" Sarah took a deep breath and walked back to their table. "Is there a problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem. This burger's cold, and the fries are soggy. Whole meal's garbage." She glanced at their plates. They'd eaten more than half their food. "I can get you something else." "How about you comp the meal?" the wiry one interrupted. "Since the service is so bad and all." "I can't do that." "If there's actually something wrong with the food, you calling us liars?" The bald man stood up, towering over her. "You think we're just making this up?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. The diner suddenly felt very small, very quiet. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the bell above the door chimed. The sound of motorcycle engines rumbled outside, growing louder, then cutting off. Heavy boots thudded against the pavement. And then they walked in, 6 of them, leather-clad, bearded, massive. They looked exactly like the kind of men you'd cross the street to avoid. The diner fell silent. The bikers took in the scene immediately, Sarah standing rigid, fear in her eyes, the three men looming over her. The lead biker, a mountain of a man with a gray beard and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Everything all right here?" His voice was surprisingly gentle. "Mind your business, old man," the bald thug said, but his bravado had faltered. "See, that's where you're wrong," the biker said, moving closer. His companions spread out, casually surrounding the booth. "This here's our favorite diner. Miss Sarah takes real good care of us. So when we roll up and see somebody giving her a hard time, that becomes our business." "We're just having a conversation," the thick-necked one muttered. "Didn't look like a conversation," another biker said. A woman with silver hair and arms like steel cables. Looked like harassment. The lead biker pulled out his wallet and placed $200 bills on the counter. "Sarah, this should cover their meal and ours." "These gentlemen were just leaving. It wasn't a suggestion." The three men looked at each other, weighing their options. But 6 bikers against 3 bullies wasn't much of a fight. The bald one threw some crumpled bills on the table and headed for the door, his friends trailing behind. "You should teach your waitress some respect," he called back weakly. "You should learn some," the silver-haired woman replied. The door slammed behind them. Sarah released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her whole body trembling. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. Hey, the lead biker said softly. "You're okay now?" "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, wiping her eyes. "I'm so sorry." You got nothing to apologize for," he said. "Nothing at all." The bikers stayed for coffee. They joked with Tommy, complimented the pie, and left a generous tip. Before they left, the lead biker, who introduced himself as Marcus, handed Sarah a card. "You ever have trouble again, any kind of trouble, you call that number. Day or night." "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Why would you do this for me?" Marcus smiled. "You know what we are? We're a veterans riding club. Every one of us served. And you know what we learned? That the strongest thing a person can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. You work hard. You deserve respect. Simple as that." After they left, Sarah stood at the counter, the card in her hand, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were different tears. The elderly couple came up to pay their bill, and the woman squeezed Sarah's hand. "There's still good in this world, honey," she said. "Don't you forget it." Sarah drove home that night thinking about Marcus's words, about the fact that help had come from the most unexpected place. She thought about how easy it would have been for those bikers to keep riding, to mind their own business, to let her handle her own problems, but they hadn't. They'd stopped. They'd stood up. They'd reminded her that kindness isn't about grand gestures or perfect people. It's about ordinary humans choosing, in small moments, to do the right thing. When she tucked her daughter into bed that night and her little girl asked if she'd had a good day, Sarah smiled, a real smile this time. "Yeah, baby," she said. "Yeah, I did. Because sometimes, when the world feels heavy and hope seems far away, humanity shows up in leather jackets and reminds you that you're not alone, that someone's watching, that someone cares, and that in the end is everything."